Well, thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar. I'm going to walk through the spring wheat variety trials here a little bit. On the right side of this slide, the banner here, a picture. I have a picture of one of our document boxes and signs. This is posted at the Miller spring wheat testing location. So the spring wheat looked pretty good out in the Miller location. And I'll talk a little bit about this at the end of the talk, but at 6 locations throughout the state, we have these signs set up with these document boxes. So if you wanted to visit the plots, you could go look at them, and you still can up through harvest, which I'm guessing is going to maybe start next week. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. I guess the outline today, it's going to be kind of brief. I'm just going to go through the varieties that we have in the 2020 trials, and then I'm going to talk briefly about yield versus protein. So starting with the variety trials, these are listed in alphabetical order. We'll just walk through the first rep. These are pictures that I took at Volga testing location. Volga, we got kind of blasted with some heat. If you guys remember, it was around June 10th to the 15th. We had about a 4-day stretch there where we had 90+ degrees and 30 to 40 mile-an-hour winds from the south. And your spring wheat was at the wrong growing stage, so basically just starting ahead or just prior. That heat, I feel, really kind of hurt some things. So Volga yields, I think, will be decent. Maybe I'd say average. I think the state average for South Dakota is around 50 bushels an acre. So I'm thinking we might see 50 or maybe 60 in Volga, but we're not going to see any really top-end yields. So I think you get the north central part of the state, Agar, Selby, and you saw this on the previous slide, Miller. They might have escaped that heat event, or the timing was right. I think there's a pretty good spring wheat crop coming in those areas of the state, but a lot of areas I think are going to be affected by that heat event we had. So I guess we'll just see how things turn out as harvest progresses. Okay, just starting here, we'll talk about each variety. Advance was released from South Dakota in 2011. And pretty good yields. It is a little bit later maturing. I have seen strong yields from this variety. However, it's getting some age on it. And I think there's better material to plant now. The grain protein content can be a little bit lacking in this one too. So you want to make sure you have good nitrogen if you plant this. Next, we have AP Murdoch. This is the second year we've seen this one. So there was a good yielder. This is from Syngenta. They are switching their prefix back to AP to kind of differentiate themselves between the rest of the Syngenta company. And last year did very well throughout the state, yielding in the top third, whether you were in the eastern, central, or western part of South Dakota. So very short statured wheat. And like I said, looked good last year. Most places it looks pretty good again this year. I guess we'll stay tuned and see how it does. Okay, the next two are Bowl from Minnesota and Boost. Bowl was released from Minnesota in 2015. Bowl is not a very high yielder. However, this will, in every likelihood, have the highest protein content in the trials. I've seen protein content on this up into the 19% before. But honestly, I feel you're giving up too many bushels when you plant it. So I tend to tell producers, stay away unless all you want is a super high protein wheat. Boost was released by Carl here at SDSU in 2015. Boost is a little bit later maturing. Excellent protein content, but 3-year yields are not the best. I guess its claim to fame would be its excellent resistance to bacterial leaf streak. So decent wheat, but there's better yielding material out there. Okay, moving on, we're going to get into the cropland wheats. I believe this is the 4th year we've seen 3530. This is a taller, kind of later maturing variety from Winfield, and it's done above average in 2019, and actually over 3 years, it's had pretty strong performance throughout the state. So of the cropland or Winfield spring wheats, this is the one I'm most familiar with, and it's been very good. So we'll go through a few more here that I'm not as familiar with. 3903 is the next one you can see on this slide. This one's a new entry. Company says excellent yield potential with good disease package. We'll stay tuned and see how it does. Next we have another new one. CP 3910. Also, company says high yield potential with acceptable protein. Short stature here, you can see in the picture. 3915 from Winfield. This is the second year I've seen this one. Last year did fairly well in the central and western part of the state, averaging in the top third. So it was a good combination of test weight and protein and yield. We'll see how it does this year. Didn't do so well in eastern South Dakota last year, but 2019 I would say was an anomaly weather year. So I think it looks all in all a little bit better this year. 3888, also from Winfield, is a blend of 3504 and 3616, neither of which we've seen in the trials. 3504 was a good yielding variety, or is a good yielding variety. 3616 I was never terribly impressed with. I'm not the biggest fan of blends. I don't see much advantage, but if you are a fan of blends, this is the only one that we have in the trial. So something you want to keep in mind. The final one from Winfield here on the right is 3099A. This is a new one. And this is advertised primarily as a forage wheat, as well as good seed production. They say 10 bushel an acre better over 3530 in 2019, which is, it's hard for me to believe that because 3530 is a pretty good yielding spring wheat, but we'll see how it does. They say that it does well in lower producing environments, so your harsher soils. Yeah, the on this material, Canadian or European in origin probably, but we'll see how this one's adapted to South Dakota. Okay, and next we have two more from South Dakota. Driver is our newest release, released actually last fall in 2019. Yields have been very good in South Dakota over the last 3 years. I would say this variety can be considered an improved version of Prevail. So if Carl was here on the webinar, he could talk about this one for 10 minutes, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a good yield, good test weight, and good straw strength, and good protein content. Focus was released in 2014, also from South Dakota State. Focus has probably the best scab resistance, well, if not the best, one of the best scab resistance traits of any of the varieties in the trial. Seems to do a little bit better in the western part of the state. Yields have kind of fallen off, but good test weight, good grain protein. All right, moving on, we have Forefront and Lang MN from Minnesota. Forefront was released from South Dakota in 2011, and very good yielding, taller variety, good test weight and protein, and it seems to do well in a stressful year. So in some of these areas that got heat blasted, it might do pretty well. This one variety's gotten a negative reputation for head shatter, so I don't think it's very popular anymore. It's a shame. The head shatter is, you lose a little bit, but not very much yield. But it's, sadly, I'm afraid this variety is going to go by the wayside due to that. Lang MN, this is the 5th year we've seen this entry from Minnesota. Lang always is a very pretty wheat, I feel, but it just, the yield performance has been a little disappointing to me. I mean, it's above average, but I just never feel it yields quite as good as it looks. I'd say performance similar to Forefront, so above average, but nothing fantastic. Good protein content in Lang, however. All right, now we're getting into the Lima grain material. Here on the left, we have LCS Cannon. Cannon's yielded fairly well, especially in the central western part of the state over the last 2 years. It was in the top third. This will be the 3rd year for Cannon, so we'll have some 3-year averages when harvest begins this year. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. And then on the right, we have LCS Buster, which we received as an experimental line this spring, and then the name came this summer. We'll see how this one does. It's brand new. They advertise it as a very high yielder with improved grain protein, so I'm thinking it's maybe a slight improvement on LCS Trigger. The one thing I'll say about this is I don't think it's going to be available for a year or 2 yet. So I'm not sure. I know it won't be available for planting next year, and I'm not even sure about the year after that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. You can see it's fairly green here yet compared to the others in this plot, so that usually means a little higher yield potential to stay green. Stay tuned and we'll see how that one does. All right, two more from Lima Grain. Rebel, we've seen that one for 4 years now, was released in 2017. Rebel does better in the central part of the state and the western part of the state, where it kind of ranks in the top third. So eastern part has just been about average. I think this plot looks pretty good in Volga this year, so we'll see how it does. And then there on the left, we have LCS Trigger, which I don't know if I need to talk too much about that one. Very late maturing, medium height variety, good lodging resistance, and this thing will put bushels out like really nothing I've seen. However, you want to watch the protein. You need to manage for protein in this variety. So I know this variety is really picking up some popularity simply because it's such a good starch producer. Starch is where you get your bushels from. And if you manage for protein, the protein can be adequate, but really the only way to do that is have good nitrogen good nitrogen levels in your soil, or plan to come in with a late season nitrogen application at flowering. Okay. Moving on, MN Torgy and MN Washburn, both from Minnesota. This is the second year we've seen Torgy. This is their new release from last fall. Yielded fairly well in eastern and central South Dakota in 2019. So this one looks very promising from Minnesota. MN Washburn, this is the third year we've seen this one from Jim Anderson. Short plant height, good lodging resistance. Surprisingly, it hasn't done too well. It's only been about average in eastern and central South Dakota, but did well in western South Dakota, which is kind of intuitively odd for a Minnesota wheat, but it's been in the top third over the last 2 years in the western part of South Dakota. As with all Minnesota, most Minnesota releases, this one, good disease package and good grain protein content. Okay, we have two experimental lines from Minnesota. The breeder did not want to provide any information. Jim doesn't really like to give out too much info until they're basically, I'd say, imminently going to be released. I worded that a little bit funny, but unless he knows they're going to be released, he doesn't like to talk about them too much. So I'm not going to talk about them either. I just thought I would show you a slide that they're in the trial, and they do look like Minnesota type weeds. All right, moving on. We're into the Meridian material now. Meridian is the U.S. marketing branch of Cantera Seeds based out of Winnipeg. Here on the right, we have MS Barracuda. MS stands for Meridian Seed. This is the third year for Barracuda, early maturing. I'd say medium to short in maturity or in stature, and excellent sandability. Grain yields have been very good in the western part of South Dakota. Chevelle, moving on. Chevelle, I think we've seen this, I want to say 5 years now, maybe even longer. It was released in 2014. This one historically has yielded fairly well. This is later maturing. It's a higher yielding, lower protein type variety, reminiscent of kind of Trigger. Did not have a very good year in 2019, but I would expect it will kind of come back again this year. As I said, 2019 was kind of an anomaly. So my history with Meridian, this is the highest yielder that I've seen from them. We have a new one here from Meridian on the right, MS Ranchero. And this is the first year in the trials. The company representative says it's early maturity and medium in height. And very good adaptation to western arid locations. And it says very good yield potential and an improvement in protein over other racehorse varieties. So like I said, it's new to us. We'll see how it does. Okay, next here we have ND Froberg. This is the newest release from SDSU. And this one is advertised to be medium tall, medium maturity with an excellent disease package. Although it seems to be a little bit taller here in our trials. I don't have any yield data from this one as it's new to us. Some of the regional nurseries, it hasn't performed that well. But this one, I guess its claim to fame that I can see is it's a very good end-use quality wheat. So kind of like Glen from the old days. We'll keep our eye and see how it does this year in South Dakota. Okay, next we have Prevail. Prevail was released from the South Dakota program in 2013. 3-year yield averages are right around average in central South Dakota, but it's in the top third in eastern and western South Dakota. So that seems a little bit strange, but this one, a very good producer from Carl's program. Like I said, Driver earlier would probably be considered a replacement for Prevail with a little bit better yield, a little bit better protein, but this one I would still label as one of my top 3 favorites from the South Dakota program. Shelley, moving on, was released from Minnesota in 2016, a little bit atypical of the Minnesota releases, as it's a little bit more of a high yielder, low grain protein content. So Central South Dakota, this one's been in the top third over the last 3 years with below average grain protein content. Kind of fell off a little bit in 2019. As I mentioned, 2019 was an anomaly. Maybe I should even just quit talking about it because the weather was so terrible. But Shelley, I think some of the highest yield potential from the Minnesota program. All right, moving on, we have Surpass here on the right. This is from Carl's program here at SDSU. Surpass would probably be, if I had to pick a favorite one from South Dakota, it would be between Driver and Surpass right now. Short in stature, high yield potential, and very early maturity, good scab resistance, good yielder year round. Third place overall in Western South Dakota. So fairly good one from Carl here. Then when we get to the Syngenta material, well, I guess we already talked about AP Murdoch, but the SY prefix material, this is the only clear field that we have in the trial, SY611CL2. 2 genes for resistance to the Beyond herbicide. High yield potential. I should note this one is certified seed only. Company says high yield potential. It has not performed the best in our trials. So once in a while, it seems to kick out a really good performance, but consistently, I can't say that it's a high yielder. I will say it seems to do better in the western part of South Dakota. I think it's been in the top third over 3 years in the central part of the state. So yeah, when I say it's disappointing, I'm not going to say it's a poor yielder. It's above average, but it just doesn't seem to be as consistent as I would like. Cy Ingmar would be, I think, what AgriPro would advertise as their high protein producing wheat, but this one still kicks out some really good yields. It's had good performance, especially in the eastern and central part of the state, but I would say this is not a good choice for West River. So if you want a good combination of yield and protein in eastern and central South Dakota, this is a good one to look at. Rustler from AgriPro was released specifically for South Dakota, I've been told, and this one's a good yielder. I would say especially in eastern South Dakota, moving into central. So maybe not quite as consistent as Ingmar and Valda, which we'll talk about next, but still a good choice. Okay, moving on, Valda. Valda's short, medium, late maturing variety. This one would be the high yielding variety from AgriPro. A little bit lower protein content, but usually adequate. So I guess my choice, if I had to pick one from Valda, or from AgriPro, this would be my top choice from them. It's been very consistent. 3-year yield ranks 4th, 2nd, and 1st eastern, central, and western South Dakota. So this one typically is vying for the top with LCS Trigger, or historically that's what it's been doing. Okay, next we have the first one from Bayer, Westbred, WB 9479. This is the 4th year for this medium short variety, and yielded right around average. I should note that all Westbred spring wheats are certified seed only, so you can only use them for 1 year. Moving on, We have 9590. This will be the third year we've seen 9590. Over 3 years, it's yielded fairly well in the South Dakota trials, making the top third eastern western locations with a very good grain protein content. This 9590 has been a good combination of yield and protein. So I guess we'll see how it does this year. Next on there, we have 9606, which is a new one. Company data says excellent yield potential, good straw strength, excellent drought tolerance, and test weight. So to be determined. I think it looks very nice here in the Volga plots. A little bit taller than some of the other Westbred material. And the last one we have is 9719 from Westbred in 2018. This will be the third year we've seen 9719. I consider this to be agronomically similar to 9653, which was a very good performer with better test weight and better grain protein content. Top third throughout the state. In fact, it ranks 8th, 3rd, and 4th in eastern, central, and western South Dakota. So it's been a good one. We'll see how it does this year. Okay, that concludes the walk through the varieties. Just some information here. If you want to go to the open house tours that I discussed earlier, you want to visit the website, and I have it listed here, or you can just visit the extension website and do a search for spring wheat, and you should be able to find it. The locations we have those document boxes are Aberdeen, Agar, Miller, Selby, South Shore, and Sturgis. There's also a copy of the handout in those document boxes, so you can walk through the plots, and there's a copy of the handout on the website. So if you don't make it to the plots but you want a copy, you can print it out from there. And also our YouTube virtual tour that we filmed is up on that website too. There's a link to it. So basically just me and my colleagues talking about the plots, kind of like what we went through today, but maybe in a little more detail in video format. Okay, then the link on the bottom of the slide, we have, this is the link to the yield results. I don't have anything up yet for 2020. Likely it'll be a couple weeks. I got to get the winter wheat done first. So I'd say maybe 3 weeks I'll start getting some spring wheat to populate, and there's the link to find those. Finally, I'd just like to share a little bit about yield versus protein. Most spring wheat producers are aware of this. This graphic, I was going to try to make one up, but I just ran out of time this morning. This is from Dr. Joachim Wiersma, University of Minnesota. This is an older graphic. It just shows the plot of protein there on the left, protein content versus grain yield as a percentage of the mean. So really what we'd like to do, you'd probably want to try to plant something over here in this area, so you have good protein and good yield. And I just kind of wanted to show this relationship here between protein and yield, and most spring wheat producers know that this is an inverse relationship. So this year, I think we may see a pretty good premium for protein. It's hard to say, but since the winter wheat yields have been so strong in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska, South Dakota, protein's been a little bit low, so they may pay up for protein in spring wheat. And this might kind of look, so this is from 2014, a graphic I did back then. And so you can see, I remember I talked about Bowl from Minnesota being a high protein wheat. If you plot the revenue, so what I did was I plugged in the protein premium discount schedule and by times the yield and protein content. And in 2014, the high protein wheats actually yielded more revenue per acre than say your high yielding low protein wheats like Stingray over here on the upper left, or Chevelle. We saw Chevelle today. That one's typically a higher yielder, a little bit lower protein. So just something to keep in mind. There's just inherent differences in the varieties. I did not share this slide, but the high yielding wheats just seem, let me restate that. The high protein wheats are just a little bit lazier. So in general, the high yielding wheats stay green longer. They put on more starch. They are also producing more protein, but it gets diluted by the starch. So the only way you can manage protein is to provide enough nitrogen to the system so the protein will be adequate for those high yielding wheats. So my opinion, if you're going to do some high intensive management type stuff, I would look toward those higher starch producers. I would lean towards those because the higher protein producers, like I'd say Glen and Bowl, they'll only do so much no matter how much you intensively manage them. So they just seem to shut off a little bit earlier. So anyway, that is my talk for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. We do have a Facebook and Twitter page. I try to post some things, Twitter, not necessarily wheat related, but anything agronomically related. So at SDSU Extension Crops there. And there's also an Instagram. I believe it's the same name, but I didn't have that on my closing slide here. So please check those out for updates.